All right, there we are. It's official now. Okay, have at it, Kelly. Thank you.
All right, great. So let me go ahead and start my screen share. So before we talk about Voyant, something that we should address is what is computational text analysis? And basically what it is computers use text as data and provide ways to analyze it. And that's my shortened version, but I do have a longer definition of it here. So some of the related terms associated with computational text analysis, you might hear natural language processing, topic modeling, sentiment analysis, and stylometry. So those are just some other terms that you kind of hear with it most often. Something to keep in mind about computational text analysis is it really is distant reading, and it's not meant to replace the close reading of a text. So anything you will read or watch on computational text analysis, everyone really stresses that point. And trust me, I think I've read and watched everything associated with Voyant. That's pretty much what I did the 3 days before Thanksgiving. So if you have any questions about good resources, and I put some links in the slides later, I will be the person who can tell you that. So I have some examples, just general examples here of some computational text analysis projects. And some of you might be familiar with some of these, but the one that I'm going to click on just to show you really quickly as an example, and I thought the humanists might be a little interested in this one. It is what everyone says about the humanities in public discourse. And if you scroll through their page, this is their project page, and they talk a little bit about why they did this, their methodology, their approaches. And then they have these great visualizations that you can click on throughout. And topic modeling is one of the types of computational text analysis that they used here. So if we look, and this is topic bubbles, and I can show you this a bit in Voyant. Okay, so they have these topic bubbles, and you'd have to read a little bit more to find out in depth what they're looking at. But this is a form of the computational text analysis. It's a visual that they created using some of that programming. My view, there we go. And if you want, you can kind of click through. They have other models that they can show you, and then they have their results at the bottom. So I just thought this was an interesting project. Another one is the robots reading Vogue. I don't know if anyone has seen this one, but it's also kind of fun. They had computational text analysis on Vogue, and there are some interesting trends. And again, with the topic modeling, you can just kind of click through this and see some of the results and the visuals that they generated through computational text analysis. Before I move into Voyant, any questions just in general about computational text analysis? So what is Voyant? It is a web-based low barrier textual analysis tool that is user-friendly for anyone who wants to explore a text. So yesterday I did a run through of my presentation just to make sure I was hitting time and I didn't talk too much, which I do sometimes. And my husband was there, and he overheard me doing the demo, and he said, "What is this? I want to play with that." And he is not a humanist, or he's not a professor, he's a computer programmer. And he said, "Wouldn't it be neat to put different translations of Russian novels in there and look for trends?" And I said, "Yeah, you can do that if you want." And then I had to spend time showing him everything again. So it was great practice, but it's very low barrier. It's user friendly. Anyone can do it. All you really need to do textual analysis in Voyant is machine readable plain text. And we will talk about that in one of the next slides. I will go ahead and show you how to make text machine readable. What does it do? It processes the text and it creates visualizations that can be used for distant reading and textual analysis. Again, we're focusing on that distant reading because it is not meant to replace close reading of text. And how do I use it? All you have to do is upload a text and click on the tools. And I hope that today's session will show you how easy it is to just do that. All right, I'm going to turn over to Jacob because he's going to talk just for a few minutes about use cases with Voyant.
So these are just a few examples of folks using Voyant in classrooms, in academic settings for research. And you'll note 3 of the 4 are homegrown here in the Ohio 5. So starting there on the top left, Jen Hayward, who's a professor of English here at the College of Wooster. Students read Victorian novels, over the course of the semester. And if you've ever read a Victorian novel, they're word heavy. You read a few Victorian novels over the course of the semester, and students are more than happy to plug those into a tool like Voyant, have the machine, quote unquote, read them, and then kind of compare and contrast the ways that the machines or not the ways the machines are reading, but kind of what does word counting, what does topic modeling kind of reveal about the ways that they're reading and the relationships between those two things. In my own class, I have a digital humanities class that I teach in global media and digital studies here at the College of Wooster. In my class, we kind of skim across a lot of tools. But one of the things that I do is we use Voyant to look at that one of the data sets that you will be linked to in a later slide is it has presidential inaugural addresses. And so you can upload that data and then use that to visualize, the word frequencies, for example, see what kind of ideas come up in presidential inaugural addresses. And then you can also sort of contextualize that historically. I'm not a historian, but we can look at some of the why are some of the longer speeches longer? Why are some of the shorter speeches shorter? And what are the trends in talking about taxes, war, those kinds of things. At Denison, Nausicaa has a forthcoming article in which they'll talk about using grammatical constructions and vocabulary usage in the language learning classroom. Laura Burch also will talk later about the use of Voyant using foreign language literature as well. And then finally, a use case that will be close to the hearts of the librarians around using Voyant as part of your research strategy. So I'll link to the description of this in a later slide as well. But here, the suggestion is that one can do research and gather some preliminary resources, dump those resources, textual versions of those resources into Voyant, and see what the word frequencies reveal about other possible topics, other possible avenues for research, either search terms or even kind of honing your own research ideas. So those are just a few use cases, and we'll look forward to hearing more about your use cases over the course of the day. Thanks, Kelly.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Jacob. So let's go ahead and start playing in Voyant. But before we do that, we have to talk a bit about machine readable. So I hope Trey appreciates this, but I did quote him a bit here in my first point. Text must be machine readable, meaning the computer must be able to process it. So as Trey tells the students pretty much every day in his digital history class, computers are stupid. They cannot just take any text you throw in there and figure it out. You have to clean it up, and it has to work with the programming that has been done in the application. So it has to suit what Voyant has in order for the text to actually be read. So what I recommend is use a plain text file. That's a .txt file when it's available. For web text, you can use HTML, so you can upload an HTML file, but realize that Voyant's going to process all the text in that entire file. So if you're thinking about just throwing a URL for a website in there, because that is an option, keep in mind it's going to see the ads, it's going to see everything. It's not going to know what the actual text is versus additional information like an ad. So that's really important to consider. And actually, for some courses, you might want it to read the ads. That could be part of a project. You cannot just add scan text that has not been converted using OCR. So keep that in mind. If you have something that's been scanned and you try to just put the scanned PDF into Voyant, it's not going to work. That's not something it can do. It can't read the text. It's only processing it. So in order to clean it up, you need to do things like remove any formatting, get rid of headers, citation pages, etc. One of the demos I watched, someone put their dissertation in and was showing how Voyant works using their dissertation, and she forgot to take out the citation pages and all of the citations inside. So New York showed up as one of the most commonly used phrases, and that was because she had used her citation page where that's the publishing location. So keep that in mind. And make sure you read it over. If you're importing all of, I don't know, Dickens novels, obviously you're not going to read all of that text that you're trying to pull in, but give it a quick skim and take a look at what it's pulling in, because there could be some additional things that might not be suited to be pulled in there. So what we're going to do now is I'm going to step out of that slide, and we're going to go ahead and make some text machine readable. So for this demonstration purpose, I'm just going to go to Project Gutenberg. If you have the slides, you'll see that later in the slide deck, Jacob does have a list of data sets. So those will be some text that you can use for your own projects. And that's on slide 21. And we can talk a little bit more about finding text later if that's a topic people are interested in. But for today, let's pull up, let's do a Christmas carol. Let's be festive. And we will click on a Christmas carol. And if you're getting something from Project Gutenberg, the file you want to download is the plain text UTF-8. That's going to be that .txt file. And it does not automatically trigger a download. It's just opening that. So you will need to right click and do a save as, or go up to file and save as. Go ahead and I'll just save it to my desktop for the purposes of the demo. Look at how clean my desktop is. I might have done that right before we started. All right, so there we go. We have the TXT file. So I always like to look at it in Finder, and then I'm just going to go ahead and open that. So if you're on a Mac, it should just open in TextEdit, a TXT file. Depending on your settings, some of you might have it open in Word, and that's fine. Just be aware that Word's going to try to default it to a docx file when you try to save it. So you'll want to make sure that you choose to save it as a TXT again after you clean the text. So in anything you pull from Project Gutenberg, there is going to be some information from Project Gutenberg at the top. So we'll want to delete that. Actually, all the way down to start. And then here we also see some additional title page information, as well as an introduction. Now, there might be times where you want to pull the introduction, and typically they will say introduction and then the year of it. But for us, I'm going to get rid of the introduction. There's also a table of contents here that I'm going to delete, and just a list of illustrations. So let's select all of that. And then here we have the title again, and then all of the chapters in the book. So you may or may not want to get rid of this. Again, it depends on your project, right? So there could be use cases where you want to keep things like introduction, illustrations, but keep that in mind. The other stuff that we need to clean, especially from Project Gutenberg, is at the end of the text, you start seeing all of this Gutenberg, this and that. This is all their legal stuff about the text. And you can do a search function to try to search the phrase end of project book or something like that. But I happen to find it really quickly this time, which is great. So I'm just going to drag and select all of this at the end, because if we don't get rid of this, Gutenberg is going to be one of those words that show up in our word cloud that we see a lot. All right. And so, as Tiny Tim observed, God bless us, everyone. I think that's the end. All right. So now that I've cleaned up my text file, I'm ready to import it into Voyant. And what I want to do is hit File and Save. Again, if you're saving it in Word, just make sure you save as .txt file. That's really important. Okay. So we can move on to the demo. I do have some slides that go along with what I'm going to demo, but I'm not going to pull those up. Those are more of a reference for you later because I'm just going to show you in the actual tool. So to open Voyant, you go to Voyant Tools, voyant-tools.org, and this is the first page that you see when you get there. I really like their help tooltips, and I was looking at those quite a bit when I was getting set up for this. And they have them in all of the different skins, and we'll talk about what skins are in a bit, but it does give you the help tips, and it's really incredibly useful for this kind of a tool. You also have some other options and language interface. So for those of you working with different languages, you can choose different languages in here, or you can allow it to auto detect. And I believe Laura, who's going to speak later, she was working with French text, so she might be able to speak to that a bit more. The first way that you can add a text to analyze in Voyant is you can click on the Open tool there, and they provide you with two different corpora that you can choose from. So the first corpus is Shakespeare's plays. You can import that, or you can choose Austen's novels. For most of the demo that I'm going to do, I'm going to come back and choose Austen's novels after I do a little bit with Christmas Carol. So you could pick one of those. Your second option is to click on Upload, and then you can search on your computer for the file that you want to import. And so for us, I'm going to choose Christmas Carol. But first, I want to touch on the third way you can add text. You could either just copy and paste. So that .txt file that I pulled up with Gutenberg, I could just copy the center stuff. You know, it's going to take a while because I'm going to be scrolling and copying all that, but I could just copy and paste it in there. It also does allow you to add URLs. So you could add several URLs if you wanted into this. Again, keeping in mind that if you are adding URLs, it will be looking at the entire web page. It's not going to know the difference between what is the text you want to focus on and what is an ad. Okay, so for us, I'm going to actually choose the upload option since we did the Christmas Carol or A Christmas Carol, and then find where it is on your computer. I have it just on my desktop today. And again, we're selecting that .txt file. I'm going to choose to open it. Woohoo! And now we have our view in Voyant. So whenever you open a text, this is the very first view you have. On the left over here, this is the cirrus. Basically, it's the word cloud. And you can see all of the most commonly used words in the text represented as a word cloud. The next one is the reader. And again, these are called skins. I referenced skins before. All of these separate boxes, those are skins. The second one is the reader, and this is the default here. I really like that they have a reader with the full text in it, because what this allows you to do is while you're looking at the text as a distant reading, you know, you're looking at the word cloud or the trends or whatever else, you also can do some more close reading by referencing the text in this particular skin. So I do really like that tool in here. The next skin over here on the right, this is called the trends. So again, we're just looking at the default, and right now it has the most commonly used words, and it shows you where those appear. Since we're looking at one text, we're seeing it in segments. So it just breaks it down in 10 segments. And you'll see later when we look at Jane Austen's novels that we're going to see each represented as a novel. So we will see that example in a bit here. I did think it was interesting, you know, Scrooge is referenced a lot in the beginning, and I believe that's because they refer to him versus when he starts going through his journey and he's referred to a bit less perhaps. So it's been a bit since I read Christmas Carol. And then over here in the bottom left, this is our fourth skin, and it is the summary skin. So it's just going to give you, like it says, a basic summary of what you're seeing about the text you've imported. Down in the bottom right, these are the context. So it's telling you the context in which the most frequently used terms. So let's scoot over, and you can adjust your columns. I think you can see that I'm kind of moving them around a bit. And if my screen is, can folks see? I can really only see Megan. Can you really see what I'm doing when I go up? Okay, good. All right. And what's nice is you can look at the term, and when you click on it, it actually shows you in the reader up there. And I'm going to show you an example in a minute of why that's kind of neat. So these are the basic skins, and we're going to go into them a bit more. We're going to talk about how to exclude words and things like that. And I'm going to do that with Austen's novel. But I wanted to share something interesting that I realized last night. So over here where I had the summary skin, I actually am going to change to the phrases because that's just another option of a different skin I can look at. And it's one of the more frequently used ones over there. So if I click at the phrases, you can take a look at the number of times these phrases are used. And as I scrolled through this, it came to my attention, where is it? So this is a phrase that I said, that's interesting that that exact phrase has a 2 count in there. So then I did some more looking into this phrase, and I said, okay, well, let me search because something seems a bit off. There must be something going on there. So then I typed it in, and this is what I found. I clicked here, right? Scrooge exclaimed. There's a couple times it appears, and it's appearing because there are still illustrations in the text. So all I did when I cleaned it up in the beginning was I got rid of the list of the illustrations, but where the illustrations actually appear throughout the text, that text is going to be there. That screen reader friendly illustration description is going to still be appearing in the text. So it's just something I wanted to point out since I noticed it yesterday when I was looking at it. And you can see here that this phrase, when I clicked on the phrase in the bottom left, it's showing up here that it's in segment 4 and it has a higher frequency, which I thought was kind of strange. So anyhow, this is A Christmas Carol, but for our purposes, we're going to switch over to Jane Austen novels because I think those offer a little bit more in-depth view of some of the tools. Okay, let's back out. So again, just to go to Voyant, and you're welcome while I do this to follow along and do it with me because you can just open the Jane Austen's novels corpus. So let's click on that, Austen's novels. And let's go ahead and open that. So again, this is a familiar view. This is what we saw when we opened A Christmas Carol. We have our 5 default skins that are appearing. So let's take a bit of a closer look at some of those. Now here we have the word cloud, and let me show you this neat thing. If you click on that little window with the arrow, it's going to allow you to export it to another window. And I think this is much better for presentation purposes. So if you are trying to go a bit more into a tool and you're just using one single visual tool, you can export it out and take a bit of a closer look. I thought that was really neat. But you can see just the general cloud there. Down at the bottom left, you can increase the number of terms. So if you want to add more, you can keep going. You also can change the scale. So right now, since we pulled in a whole corpus, it's selecting the whole corpus, but I could just change this to, let's do Sense and Sensibility. and it might take a bit, especially if more people are in there. There it goes. But we can see the different terms in the different novels. So it's pretty interesting. I want to leave this view because I want to show you back in this main view. Something else that's really great is if you are in the multi-skin view, so just the regular one, and let's say we click on, let's do room. So we click on the word room and it will change the other skins to reflect that word. So I clicked on room and now we see over here in that trends where before we were seeing multiple ones, it's highlighting the word room. Now it's not going to carry to all of them and don't ask me why. It just depends on which one you're in and if you click a word, if it will show up. But I can reset that there as well. So they do interact with each other a little bit, and it just kind of depends on which skin you're in, if it will show up, if that term will show up in the other ones. So some other things that are useful is here, this is always going to be your options. This it looks like an on and off trigger. So if you click on that, you can see the different options for words, and they all have the option to have stop words. So if you click edit list, stop words are the ones that you are not going to include in your visualization. So we have Mr., Mrs., and Miss showing up a lot. And those are pretty useful, I think, in these novels because they're typically talking about a particular person, right? So Mr. Darcy or Miss Elizabeth or Miss Bennett. So they do identify the person, but let's say perhaps you don't need those. You could add Mr., Mrs., and Miss in here. You also can scroll through and see the list that they have come up with as a stop list. So you might want to take some of these out if it matters for what you're analyzing in the text. But a lot of what they include here are prepositions, conjunctions, pronouns, transitional words, so things like that. So this is their pre-generated list and you can modify that if you see fit. So let's save this and hit confirm just to take a look at what it looks like now. So now that we've taken those words out, we can see that our word cloud looks quite different. And said is another one we may or may not, depending on what question we have about the text, want to remove the word said. So that is a little bit about stop words. Let's scoot over. So again, the reader is pretty straightforward. It's reading, right? You can read the text, and then down here you can actually see the different text. So you could move to the different ones. This is Mansfield Park, Emma, Northanger Abbey, Persuasion. So you could click in there and move through those texts, and we will see more of reader in a bit. Over here in the document trends, so this is looking at everything, at all of them, and again we still have those default most commonly used terms, Mr., Mrs., said, miss, and think. So those are the big ones. So we can, again, we can choose to do a stop list in here. Hold on, am I lying? Where is it? There it is. Okay, we can change our stop list, and this is going to be unique. So it's not remembering our stop list from the other one. So if you have certain words that you know you want to have on your stop list, you can always keep those in a separate document or text file and then copy and paste them as you're doing things. So depending on your question and what you're researching, you might want to keep those. So let's take a look at what it looks like when we remove Mrs., Miss, Mr., and let's do said this time. Let's hit save. Okay. Well, you can also just turn them off. If we want, we can turn off those words and we can just look at think here. That was odd that it didn't do that for me. So if someone knows why, feel free to jump in, because I thought that's how that worked. But that's fine, because it's going to transition us into the next thing I want to talk about, which is how to search for specific terms. So we have those on our stop list, but again, we can always click on stuff from our word cloud and have it appear over here in the document terms. But let's say something that we're researching might be about times people gather for food or for meals and those types of social situations that are happening in Austen's novels. So some of the words we might want to consider are dinner, dining, supper, tea, things like that. So we can add a specific list of words over here and take a look at how they trend through the different novels. So let's start with supper. So we can do supper. And if you include the asterisk there, that's going to include supper and suppers with an S, and it's going to include those as one single term. The next thing we might want to do is tea. So they have tea. And here, this is a bit tricky because if we have tea with an asterisk, it's also going to include everything that starts with the root word of tea, because that's the stem, right? Or the stem of tea. And so it's going to include tears, teach, tease, teasing, tear. So we don't really want to do the asterisk there. So we might just want to use the word tea. And then I was looking at dinner, dine, dining, dinners, dines, all of those. So we can choose to do din, and that will include the root of din. So we can go ahead and choose that. And now we can see, oops, I got rid of supper, sorry. There it goes. So now we can see the trends of those words and where they appear in the different novels. So maybe it might answer some questions for us on like how much they use dinner or dine, any of those words here. And if I click, it's going to highlight that word dine, din, dinner, any of those in the context area down here. So then again, we can move these around a bit and we can see the different terms. And if we click on them from the context area, we can then see them up in the reader there. So that's just one way you can do that. Also, perhaps you want to now look at a specific text. We can see here in Pride and Prejudice, that is one that's used a lot more, the din stem. So we could just look at Pride and Prejudice down here, and that's going to be in your scale option. You're going to click on documents and you can select just Pride and Prejudice. So let's unselect the others and hit OK. And now we can just focus in there on Pride and Prejudice. And if you pull that out, all of the documents for Austen's novels have the year in front of them. So, but you could click through and you can see the different instances where they're using dine, dining, dined, dining, all of those. You can also change some of the displays in the trends. I do really like how trends and context kind of work together. I think they play together very nicely, and it really helps you dig in a little more in depth in some of the words that you're looking at. In the display here, this actually allows you to change how you see this skin. So let me try to make it a little bit bigger, and you can adjust that. So you could change it to be area. So that's just a different kind of graph. And this is not very accessible, because if anyone has a color blindness or other visual impairments, this is not a very great graph to look at. But they also have columns there and they have labels on them. So we can see the word frequency. Again, we're seeing Pride and Prejudice is the most here. And then we can also see that perhaps persuasion is the second, with dine at least. Line, just line, do stacked bar. Again, not a very accessible one. I mean, not even great for folks who don't have visual impairments, because you can't really read anything there. And then if you kind of go down this trail and you're like, oh, I've really messed up the visual, what in the world is happening? You can always hit reset, or not. Go back to the initial line display here. Show labels. There we go. Line and stack bar. Eek. Or you can just refresh, actually. I thought when I hit refresh yesterday, it was my friend. It's not being my friend today. But there we go. So that's a little bit more on this one. And depending on how, oh, there it is. Depending on how far you modify it, you might just want to restart. So that's something to think about with Voyant. When you use it through the web interface, you do want to make sure you're kind of keeping track. So these are the words I've decided are my stop words. Put those in a separate document so you can just copy and paste them. If you have found that there are specific words you're using to do searches or to refine, you can go ahead and put those in a separate document, right? Copy and paste them in. Again, make sure you're using plain text when you're doing this and not any fancy things with that. So there are a lot of other search terms that you can use, and I did include those on a slide, and maybe I can flip through those a bit before you go into groups here in a little while. But those are the main ones you're going to use, or stemming. You can also allocate. So let's say we want to include two separate words together as a line on our chart here. So let's get rid of this because now it's kind of lost it a bit since I did the reset. Let's redo it. Let's say we're looking now at their example is love. So let's do love. Now we could say we just want to see the word love and loves together. Again, that's their example. I'm borrowing a bit. You can add a line there and then add loves. So love and loves, and you could even stem it there. You can see they have the example with the asterisks, but let's get rid of Mr. And now grouped together, we see instances of love and loves. It looks kind of funny when you hover over it, but it's not Lovell loves. There is a line in between the two. So that's joining them together so that you can search both of them as one. So we could do that with our examples of dine and then dining if we wanted those to show up together, and they gave an asterisk to those, versus the word dinner, and we could make those two separate ones. So this is wrong. Hold on, let's try that again, because if we asterisk that, that's going to include it twice, right? So think about that when you're doing this, because we don't want the asterisks on the end. Let's just do those. No asterisks, please. There we go. So now we can see the reference to dinner versus dine or dines and how those trends look different. And we've joined these two. And then here we're including dinner as the stem. So dinners, anything like that. Okay, so, and again, they have these little question marks, which are so incredibly useful, because if you are working in here and you're like, I'm trying to do this certain kind of search and I'm not sure what special characters I need to do it, if you hover over the question mark, it gives you quick search syntax for all of that. Okay, so I'm going to switch over to the slides just for a moment so that you can kind of see where we've been, because I want to show you a few other of the tools before I send you into some of the groups. So let's take a look here. We did this. We opened the Jane Austen's novels, and we also uploaded an example of something we cleaned up from Project Gutenberg. There. So the next thing we talked a bit about were the skins. And again, once you have these slides, you can click on any of the links I have in there. So you can go right over to those areas on the Voyant help site. Then I also went over a bit about stop words and searching. So I included the syntax there, and I skipped grids, but we'll talk about that in a moment. And then here's the other thing I wanted to point out. So there are a ton of viz tools that it has. There are currently 24 visualization tools, and some of them are in beta. So those are not going to be the most accurate. There are some neat ones that they've been working on that I saw, and I'm trying to look and reference them, but they just have so many available. There was textual arc. I think that's one that's still in beta, but I put the link there and I'll pull it up too because they have so many different ones. And I'm just going to quickly, since we have the time, we're a bit ahead on time, I'm going to walk through some of the additional visualization tools, and they're the ones that I highlighted here. And then you can also explore some more of them later in groups. So I'm at the point where we're going to talk a little bit about more of the visualization tools, but just to give you an idea of their tools, this is what happens when you click on all of their tools, all 24 of the options they have. And I was playing with some of them the other day, and they can be a little overwhelming. So one of the things to think about when you're looking at tools is what question are you asking of the text or about the text, and what tool might be able to help you see that better. So you can always click through these and get a sense of what they're doing. But let's take a look at just a few of them right in Voyant. So I'm going to click on over here in the first skins area, I'm going to click on the links. And this is just going to show you some of the most common words, because that's just what we have in our in this window, and we can see how they link to other words. Now, you can hover over no, and it will tell you the frequency. And this is raw frequency, I believe, in this one. That's the number that no appears. And if you have questions about the frequency, I believe in the options, in some of them you can decide the type of frequency. And I'm not sure if this tool doesn't seem to do it, but I can show you that in another one. But this is putting those words there. Again, we can use our example of dining, right? Or let's be more specific. Let's say dinner. We can add dinner in there. We can, so this one I can search. Oops. This one, we're doing that searching, right? And we can clear that, and let's see what supper does. I don't think supper is used as much. Oh, maybe it is. Yep, zoom out. There it goes. And you can, this is just a fun visual. This might be one that, again, you want to export the URL to open in a new window with exploring. Another one that is fun that I like is Termsbury. And I think we did this in Trey's class this semester, and we had one student who's like, that can't make sense because of the frequency, but this is definitely relative frequency. So keep that in mind. And I'm not a mathematician by any means. My background is literature and then digital humanities. So, but keeping that in mind, it is neat because you can hover over Elizabeth and you see the number of times now where it says 700, that is the number of times it appears. But Elizabeth, in relation to the other words, this is going to be relative frequency. So we can see, and it's kind of hard to see in this one. Let's turn down our terms. Oops, maybe more than 5. Let's try 25. So where did Elizabeth run off to? We can type in Elizabeth. Okay, and we can see Elizabeth here, right? Our 700 times, and she is in frequency to some of these other words in there, and we can have a look at that. And what's nice is when you click on Elizabeth, you see Elizabeth over here now as well. And if you wanted to go into it a bit more, you can also put Elizabeth down here, or you might want to do Eliza with a star for Elizabeth's. And then you have it there as well. And it does reset. I have noticed that sometimes it gets a little finicky, like since I clicked out of it and removed something else, it got rid of my Elizabeth view. But imagine that. Elizabeth is most often used in Pride and Prejudice. Okay, so let me reset some of this, because another one, so that was Termsbury. Another one that some folks really like is bubbliness. And this is going to show you the frequency of a term throughout the different documents. And so this is good if you're dealing with more than one individual document. So let's do our example of dine, right? So that's going to be dine. And something that you can think about too is when we looked up here and we had, what did we have? We had dine, and then we had supper, and then we had tea, right? Those were our ones from earlier. And we saw that dine as the STEM word was much more frequently used. So we could just pull up dine down here, but if we wanted, we could really add all of them. And again, not one of the most accessible because it's just doing color there, but depending on what you're looking at, and then I could add T as well. And now I see the different frequencies and I see them throughout the whole corpus. You can also move and expand, right? So that's another one. People like the bubbliness one. Now I want to put you in groups, but just one more thing to note is you really can put any of the Viz tools or the skins in any of these 5 windows. So if you wanted, you have these little, it looks like a window. And if you click on that, you see all of the different tools that you can choose from that you can put in this particular one. Now they have different types. So by default, they kind of have this organized in a way that, you know, all the grids are in the bottom, different visual tools are kind of grouped together. But what we can do up here, the bubbles one is very interesting. So the bubbles one, which you might want to be careful with using, that's kind of fun. That's going through and looking at the words there, and you can speed it up or slow it down. But if you open that one in another window, I think it's a lot easier to see. So we can open that. And yeah, again, it's kind of wild a bit. Let's do Pride and Prejudice since we were looking at that. You can add sound, and that actually really scared me quite a bit the first time I looked at it, because I was like, where is that noise coming from? But it's kind of going through and it's creating the bubbles from the text based on how often they appear. So right now we're only at the beginning because you can see where it's at. And if you speed it up, right, you can see how fast it's going through processing. Again, it's not reading, right? People read, computers are stupid, but it's processing that text and making it appear in there. And it's just kind of a fun one, right? So we can go ahead and X out of this one. Oh, there we go. Okay, and let's switch back to Reader because that one is very, very busy. Okay, so I'm going to switch us back to our slides here that don't like to change for me. Okay, so we're going to break into some groups here. Sure. Okay, so I put up here before we hop out into group discussion to go to Voyant tools, and you can choose a machine readable text and load it. I will let you decide what you want to do for that. So if you want to go to Project Gutenberg and load something, or if you brought a text, you're welcome to do that. But we only have about, I think I've slated 10 minutes for the group. So if you want to do it quickly just to play around with the tools, choose one of the existing corpora that Voyant already has. And then in your group, so you do that, experiment, just click around and learn stuff about them. That's what I've been doing, and it's pretty fun, actually. And then the 2 main questions I have for you are, what can you do with text, and what are the limitations? Because Voyant's not going to do everything, right? So what can't you do, and what is that barrier? So I also put the link to the slides again that Jacob gave us in case anyone wants to go ahead and pull those up. And we'll regroup in 10 minutes.
Cool.
Okay, have fun. But if we want, let's go ahead and we can have a free-for-all. You can raise hands. We only have a few minutes until the break, and then Trey and Laura are going to speak about it in the wild, and they might have some more tips and tricks for you. But what are some of the things that you discovered you can do with Voyant?
Analyzing one's writing, right, or students analyzing their writing. So Laura talked a little bit about how students writing in a second language might come to rely on specific constructions in that language. And so they would, like this sort of tool could help visualize those constructions. And we were riffing on Gregor talking about, at Oberlin, talking about using it with their own writing. So
that's great. Any limitations, like something you were trying to do and you're realizing that Voyant can't do it, or you're not really quite sure if it can yet? Are you finding some limitations to it?
Not a limitation, but I uploaded a part of a book manuscript I'm working on, and I can see that earlier in the writing process, I was using the word folks, and later in the writing process, I was using people. And so it's actually helpful that I could go through and defolksify part of the manuscript, increasingly folksy the later, so that it's not, so that there's not such a contrast between earlier writing and later writing.
You know, I really like that idea of using it as a step in the writing process and kind of taking a look, because one of the presentations I watched, someone talked about the sentence density that they had. And she pointed out that she's trying to work on not being such a dense writer. And she found that when she put her writing in there, it was telling her she had these really long sentences and she was trying to break those down. And that would be in the summary tab as well. So that's a great example.
Or like freshman writing,
Yeah, right.
let them put all their papers in at the end of the semester to do
That would be fun.
Yeah, great.
Yeah. Oh, we're on. Sorry. Sorry.
No, I think that's a great assignment. You know, they could just run their own corpus of their work in a writing class or any class really, and do some self-reflection.
Yeah, I was trying to figure out how can you search for two words related to each other? So for example, women in money or women in economics.
So there are a few ways you can actually do that depending on which viz tool you're in, but you can whitelist them. And what a whitelist is the opposite of the stop words. So you can whitelist where only those two words show up. So I don't know if you like want to do it with linking, or we can take a closer look at that this afternoon too and kind of play around with it. But you can do it to where it only displays two words in some of the viz tools.
Kelly, are we gonna touch on how to build a corpus, like in the way that they visualized all of Austin's stuff at all?
I mean, Jacob, I didn't have that in the slides. Maybe next semester. Is that advanced? Is that advanced Voyant? I guess we can do it this afternoon if we want.
Yeah, well, maybe we can talk. We'll talk about it here, and then we'll see what folks are interested in. Because it's similar to it's not a difficult process. It's similar to what you did, so we can kind of talk through that.
Okay. Yeah. So it looks like we have a 10-minute break. If anyone has any pressing questions during that, you can send them through in the chat. But when we get back from the break, we will hear from users of Voyant in the wild.
So just in the way of brief introduction, Trey has lots of slashes on his personal page, indicating lots of different disciplinary interests. And I think we'll get to see how a few of them intersect here in Voyant. And Trey's also, as we heard, been involved with the DH minor as it has grown there at Denison. So congrats to you all for that. We'll start this afternoon actually with Laura Burch, who's associate professor, and are you your department chair of French and Francophone Studies. She's been a real champion of Ohio 5 digital scholarship, at least insofar as I've been involved in it, and has worked on a large scale text mining project focused on the works of Madeleine de Sudery, if she'll forgive my pronunciation. Katie, my partner is a fluent French speaker and makes has no end of fun with my French accent. So without further ado, I'll turn things over to Laura.
So thanks, Jacob. So I think my my presentation will be pretty quick. So if people need more details or have questions, please feel free afterward. But I've used Voyant in the context of a class about the relationship between seeing and knowing, right? And seeing and not knowing, not seeing and not knowing. So it's sort of all those combinations in the 17th century, in the French 17th century. So Voyant has helped me with two main goals. The first is to practice and model how to generate questions based on a limited amount of information. So when students are reading French texts, I think even when they're reading in their native language, you go through a first read and you have incomplete information and incomplete comprehension about what it is that you've just read. So, but in a foreign language, I think that effect is magnified. So Voyant helps me help them identify that they don't have to understand everything and know word for word what's going on to generate interesting questions that can then motivate second, third, fourth readings of text. So that's the second goal, is how to use those questions to generate motivated rereadings of text. Because I think that's another thing that students have they don't know that we work on deep textual analysis in a lot of my classes, and they don't know that really involves multiple returns to the text, and that you don't have to do it from beginning to end. You can kind of take chunks at a time and make them more manageable and more motivated, as I said, more focused, more targeted. So far I've tried to do this in two different ways. The first way is I've had them look at Voyant before they read the text. And this was really motivated. You can put that there, it's fine. This is a screenshot generated from a text by Madame de Scuderi, one of her philosophical conversations on dissimulation and sincerity. And these texts are not available, the portions of her conversations that I would like my students to read are not available in a modern form. And when I had them read these, when I had them read PDFs, which were scans of the original text, they had a really hard time getting past the typography, the early modern spelling conventions, even the page formatting, right? Lack of paragraphs, a lot of dense text on every page. And they really hated this text. And this is like my main focus of my research. So it's like, oh my God, am I never gonna be able to teach this again? So I have used Voyant since then to kind of give them a window into the text and to sort of talk about like, what questions we might have, right? Before we get into this text, and then also to sort of compare, like, what does the modern transcribed version look like versus the old one? And so what are to talk about out loud what the difficulties are for students who are still learning French when they want to read 17th century text in the original. And one brilliant thing that has happened is that they actually want to read the PDFs now instead of the transcribed text, which is lovely. Yeah. So, but basically we use the word cloud, we use the links to start asking questions, right? So this conversation is called on dissimulation and sincerity. And so of course they notice for the, right away that sincerity is where the emphasis is, at least in terms of word frequency, right? So like, what does that mean, right? Why is that, right? Like who's talking about sincerity and who's talking about dissimulation and why? Like what could that imbalance mean when you have both of those words in the title, right? But the word sincerity comes up most often. They notice things like the characters' names, right? They know these are conversations. So they notice, for example, that there's two, Mathilde and Padille, right, are two feminine names. So right away they're like, oh, what does that mean? Does it mean that they speak the most? Does it mean that people are speaking to them most often, right? Like what is it that accounts for the dominance of these two feminine names, right, versus all the other ones, right, that are in here, because it's a conversation amongst several people. And it's not a dialogue that's set up in terms of like where you have the name of the person and then they speak in the name of the person. That's one of the ways that it makes it hard to read. So that's how I use it to prepare them to enter a text that might have some obstacles to reading, whether that's foreign language itself or the format of the text itself. The other way that I've used it really recently is with a text that they've already read once. And we do that with Tartuffe by Molière. And what I have them do is read the text, and then we have a whole class period where we talk about, we just sort of get the nuts and bolts of the plot down, because sort of plot comprehension can be a thing, right? And then I have them generate on their own, before they look at this, if they were going to explain this text to someone who didn't know it or wasn't familiar with it, what would be the 5 key words that they would have to use in order to give that explanation appropriately? And so we sort of compare our lists of keywords, and we talk about them, and we go back to the text and we say, well, I thought it was because this scene was really important. This person said this, that person said that. So that's really helpful. And then we look at Voyant, and we compare those lists that they created with the word frequency lists. And we sort of talk about, like, how does this, what surprises do we find in this list? How does this list compare with what we were thinking was important? Does it mean what we thought was important is not actually important just because it's not as frequent? What are the links we use? I love the links thing. What are the links between certain frequent words and the ideas that we picked up on, and then what did we not really pick up on, right? And what would merit further investigation upon a second, third, fourth reading. One of the great things that happened this semester with this exercise is when they did this in Voyant, because I had them do that as homework, to sort of like look at that and compare and think about it before they came to class and we talked about it. They all completely eliminated all the names of the characters, because they were like, well, it's normal in a play that names Oberlin, Dorine, Tartuffe, Marianne, that these names would be so frequent because you've got that in the text announcing who's speaking, And so we don't think that that's an important thing to notice right now. And I was like, okay, that's legit. I was like, but what if we pretended that it wasn't legit? Like, what if we pretended that it was interesting that Oberlin is the name that comes up the most, the person who is now I'm not thinking in English, but who begins to speak, who replies, who has dialogue clearly the most often, right? And by a lot, even though he's not the eponymous character of the play, right? Tartuffe is the eponymous character, and he's the fourth one down and the third most frequent speaker, right? So we just did a lot of playing around with that, and it generated a ton of really interesting questions related to all the main themes of the text. So it was really great. So those are my, and we, look at the links. I use the, the text view so that we can really hone in on certain parts of the text more easily, and they have sort of a visual cue, and they don't have to be looking for it in their text, because we all have different editions. So that's cool. That's the simple way that I use Voyant. I'm not an advanced user of Voyant in any means, but yeah, question generation. That's my goal.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Laura. Having that reader view, Kelly was talking about it, but I hadn't thought about it as a way of mitigating the everyone having a different edition kind of thing, is you're all looking at the same thing in that way. Excellent. So why don't we'll turn it over to Trey, and then we'll see if we have some time. We can take some time for questions before lunch.
Well, first of all, can you guys hear me? Great. So my use of Voyant is not nearly as sophisticated as Laura's, but I'll tell you a little bit about the class that I teach first, and then how it is that I've incorporated Voyant into it. The course is looking at runaway enslaved peoples in Ohio, and the focus is digital tools. So the grist, the content for the course, are ads in Ohio newspapers, and to supplement that, narratives. So we read the sections from Frederick Douglass on his escape. We read the sections from Harriet Jacobs on her escape, but then there are actually a few narratives for enslaved peoples in Kentucky who flee to Ohio either permanently or on their way to Canada for permanent freedom. The goal of the class is to create an Omeka site that includes all sorts of digital history outcomes. So we do mapping and we do non-narrative stories using Inky, and then to use Voyant. So basically, my use of the class is we read a few narratives in common and we have conversations about them, about patterns that students find, and sort of to see if there's not ways that we can start to think about themes in multiple narratives as opposed to just reading a single one. And then I wanted students to use those to produce two things. One was a non-narrative, a non-linear narrative that might be, here's the prototypical experience of a runaway. Do they run away at night or in the day? And in order to make that work and be historically accurate, they would have to read all of the narratives, but I don't have time for that. So what I asked them to do is to read one and then share notes, but then we can use Voyant to create a corpus with all of those narratives where they can sort of be checking each other and seeing if there are other patterns that they might use. So for Voyant, what I asked them to do was to capture some narratives. And so it turns out that all of these narratives are available through a repository called DocSouth, DOC south.unc.edu. And they're available in HTML and TEI or XML format. And when you bring those into Voyant, Voyant cleans them. And in essence, this is one way to create a corpus is to do that. And I'd be happy to talk about that more. But then once we had created that corpus, I asked my students to do two things. One was when we read the narratives, one of my students made the observation that he felt like the authors were using the words liberty and freedom differently. And he felt like that they were using liberty more, and he wanted to know why and if there was a difference in meaning. And so I asked them to sort of test that question using Voyant. And one of the things that I realized in looking at their responses is that we would have to do something about stems. Because when they looked just at freedom and liberty, they found one pattern, but when they truncated freedom to free, they found a different pattern. They found that free was coming up a lot more, and they didn't see significant differences. But the problem is that free then can be it can be a descriptor, but it may not be sort of a state. It may not be a noun, whereas liberty probably is more a state all the time. And so, but it was an interesting question. I thought that the question that the student raised was really, really brilliant. And I thought that Voyant was an easy way to sort of test that. If I were to turn that into assignment, I'd want to tease out these questions of stems and whether or not we have to make distinctions between adjectives and adverbs and nouns as we sort of assess this stuff. The second thing that I asked them to do was just to play with Voyant with these with the corpus that we created and see if they could find patterns that they found interesting. And it appears, based on what they worked with, that they relied pretty heavily on the termsbury pane, which when you open up Voyant is the second option in the middle upper skin. And really what that does is it allows you to identify a term, and then when you hover over it, it uses color to signify the relative frequency that that word appears near other words. or the other words appear near to that word. And so there's a couple of things that that I found really interesting that my students, that was a terrible Freudian slip, that my students identified. The first one was that I thought was really great is that a student was looking particularly at the term master as it appeared in our corpus, and they found that there was a clear association of master with the word new. Well, it turns out that changing masters, moving from one master to another, was often a moment in which enslaved peoples made a decision to run away. So there's a clear association of patterns that we would find with our readings with Voyant. And so the student was like, wow, this is really interesting that it appears that they're talking about new masters in the context of flight. So I thought that one was really great. Another one that a student focused on was the word poor. And she found that poor in this instance did not seem to refer to a socioeconomic standing, but more to, it served as a synonym for unfortunate. So my poor mother, my poor wife, my poor children, as opposed to poverty. And again, it's an interesting sort of pattern to discover. And then the last one that I would share is a student who made comments about the lack of an association that he found. And that was an association between the noun slave or slaves and home. And so he was speculating about whether or not part of the condition of enslavement is sort of a sense of not having a sense of home. So in this case, he was more interested in a pattern that didn't exist than a pattern that did. So the last thing that I would sort of add here is I am still searching for assignments. Like my class, I'm showing them lots of tools and giving them lots of opportunities to play with those tools. And I'm still trying to figure out the ways to design assignments that are going to sort of encourage them to do the type of thinking that we want them to do. Because in my case, my class very much is about the digital, and the history is the path to that. And so it was great to hear another perspective where the focus still really is on content and on questions that we would traditionally ask in our courses while using digital tools. So the next time I teach this class, I'm hoping to have a better sense of what I might ask students to produce with Voyant in the form of assignments that's going to sort of enrich and deepen their experience with it. So I'll stop there and see if you guys have any questions. Thank you.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thanks so much, Trey. I think we'll have some opportunities this afternoon to think together about some of these things that you're asking about, like think together about structuring assignments, about, for lack of a better term, deliverables for students and things like that. But yeah, are there questions? Feel free to unmute and shout them out for our presenters.
Thank you. Hello again. So I was thinking about, and I don't know if maybe this is a question more for Kelly, but the texts themselves, is it possible to sort of like, I know you can see the trends of, at the beginning of the text, we hear this word a lot, but is it possible to break up a text so that you can, like, say, for example, if it was a book, just to give an example, you wanted to look specifically at chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3, but they're all in one cohesive text. Is it possible to break those up, or would you have to create separate text?
I don't know the answer off the top of my head, so I'd have to look into that a bit more. I feel like there must be a way to do that. Have you done anything with that, Trey? No, yeah. Anyone else have experience doing that? Because I know it'll break them into segments, but those are not like chapters. So that would be something. Jacob, you know more about that.
Yeah, and so Voyant wants to have those segments for that trend, right? So if you don't give it segments, it will just turn it into 10 random segments. But if you wanted each chapter, if you wanted Voyant to process each chapter individually, you have to save them each as a different text file. This is kind of what I was asking about before. So this is a way that you would build a corpus. So let's take, any given Dickens novel or Austen novel, copy and paste, each chapter called, Austen chapter, Northanger Abbey chapter 1, Northanger Abbey chapter 2, however you want to name them that's significant, but you'll need to name them in an order, right? So that you have, so that the machine is reading something that goes 1, 2, 3 in a sequence, right? And then you will upload that zipped file into, you'll crunch those all together. This is the quick version of that. You compress all those into a zip file, you upload that, and then it will see each chapter individually. So that's how they did the Austen data set. So each book there, so if you wanted them through time, I think the Shakespeare is saved with the year and then the name of the play, so that when it's processed, it shows those over time. So so you can kind of dictate the sequence with file names. But yeah, that's a long answer to the question. I'm happy to show a little bit of that this afternoon if that's useful for anyone.
Yeah, Trey pointed out too that you don't have to zip them. You can just upload all of them. I also just threw in the chat, I know only the host will see it, but I can do a quick screen share here just to show you the page in the Voyant tools help. You could ignore the other tabs somewhere I'm going after this, but this page here goes through creating a corpus where you can, it just kind of walks you through that. And I know Trey and I were talking earlier, and he said the options here are really good because you can also upload like a TI file or another XML document under the options and choose for it to make sure it excludes the code. You can also tell it to exclude headers as long as you tell it how. He mentioned that with Project Gutenberg, there are always asterisks. So you can tell it to exclude everything before the asterisks and everything after the second set of asterisks. So you can also play a little bit with those options and kind of tell it what to do a bit more.
Okay. And so just, I think I know the answer to this already, but what we initially said was, it already creates those segments unless you define those segments for it. Is it possible to define the segments within a single text? And the reason, okay.
It doesn't sound like it.
Okay, yeah, because I'm thinking of this from a social, doing a analysis of participant entries, for example. And so you have all of these participants in a study doing an open-ended response to a question or something like that. I would have to save each individual participant's response as its own file in order to make comparisons across participants.
I believe so. That's how at least Jacob has described doing it in the past. I don't know if anyone else has a better way.
Megan wants to talk to me.
We can also spend some time at lunch and after kind of clicking around with the Voyant tools help, because there's so much you can do in there, right? And maybe there is some magical thing. Someone's waving in the background.
I don't know if there's a magical thing, but because I work with texts that are conversations where you have the same speaker speaking multiple times, we've played around in the class with taking the transcribed version of the text, the digital version of the text, and separating out all of the dialogue that belongs to one character and then uploading it into Voyant and comparing that with all of the text that belongs to another character, right? And that's just...
Did you do that by hand?
Yeah, we did it, but we just did the copy and paste by hand, take it all out, right? Have sort of a master file and then take out from that master file, copy and paste, create new files, right? What we haven't done is put all those files together in the same, into one, Voyant window. So I like that idea. So I've kind of kept them separate, and then so it would be cool to do it that other way.
Yeah, Ashley, I think this has to do with, cleaning up your data and getting it prepped to come in. So if you really want to have defined breaks, then, clean it all up in one text file and then just copy and paste them out and pull them in as a corpus. That I did look a little bit more and I'm not seeing anything. So it's probably the easiest to do it that way.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah, so I have a small question for Trey, and that's regarding have you designed assignments? So I just wanted to ask, like, do you first design the assignment and then try and find relevant texts, or do you find texts first and then create an assignment out of that?
Yeah, in my case, Hanada, it's sort of symbiotic, I think. I had data, I had texts that I knew I could use, and then the question was, how might we be able to use it? For me, it was easier to figure out the other things that I would want students to do because I use mapping and social network analysis in my own research. That's what brought me into the digital humanities. And I'm just now starting to dip my toe into distant reading. And so, I think it's part of it is about what we want the technology to do. Is it supposed to support learning that's already happening in a course? We have a colleague in history who does Hody Yosef, who works on, she teaches a course on Ottoman piracy, and she wanted, much like Laura, to use technology to force students to read closer. So her assignments were very much about getting students to focus on the nitty-gritty of the text, place, time, things like that, whereas they were tending to skim and looking for salacious moments in those texts. And I think that's a really brilliant use of technology. And so then she constructed assignments to sort of facilitate that work. I will admit, I'm just piloting it, being like, let's play with these tools and see what we can do to create assignments on the back end. And now, having taught this class, the next time I teach it, I'll have a much better sense of the homework that I'm going to ask students to do, which is really just about learning. In this case, it's really just about learning Voyant and thinking about distant reading that they might then apply to a final project. So I have groups, and one group of students is actually going to use Voyant to not look at narratives, but to look at ads. So they're going to create text files for every single ad that we have, and then we're going to use those as their corpus to try to find patterns of word use and that. And for me, that was really the goal. I just wanted to show them some tools and then ask them to sort of come up with a final project where they might apply some of those tools. So that's what I was thinking.
Yeah, I would just say I'm a big fan of backwards course design. So I have learning goals for the whole course and then learning goals for each session that we have. And, I kind of select, we can't read everything. It would be great if we could read everything from the 17th century, but we can't. So, I have to select texts and I change them from time to time. But, the texts are selected with those learning goals in mind, but then I just ask myself, like, what are tools like Voyant, how can they get me to those learning goals, right? And sometimes those change based on the students that you have, right? Like, I had different learning goals in the beginning before I started using Voyant, for example, but those weren't matching with what students felt that they were capable of doing. So, I think it's just kind of back and forth between what are the tools available, what are your goals, how do the tools then shape that, and then what is the relationship between the goals, the tools, and the students.
That's great. That kind of everything being in relationship with one another, I think, is probably the lesson going forward with all of this stuff.
But it sounds like from what Trey's saying too, it's like, Voyant helps you see those things.
Yeah.
Really, playing around and using your class time to, just play around. Let's see what happens, right? Can be really a really nice feedback loop.
Generative,
Yeah.
very generative. Cool. Stopped it. We were recording all of the quiet during lunch also. So this first slide is tutorials and demos to kind of supplement some of the work that we're doing here. This I know Kelly said she spent days going through these sorts of things, and I found this one in the middle here, the Pam Latch one, extremely helpful. And she's extremely generous too, so I'm sure if you had follow-up questions, she'd be happy to answer those. Anything that we can't answer, I'm sure we would probably reach out to her also. Tutorials and demos, followed by some contexts and ideas. So these are some, yeah.
Jacob, can you go back to the last one just really quick? Thank you. So that help site's right there. Again, the Pam Latch one, like Jacob mentioned, a lot of what I did was based off of how she did her walkthrough. So that's a really good one. She also goes into a little more detail with some of the other visual tools. But the one I also wanted to point out is at the bottom there. Oh, it did not update. Jacob, can you refresh? Because I added a link to the bottom. Trey kindly gave us access to his tutorial that he made for his students in the digital history course for Voyant. So that is also in there now. It should be at the bottom of the tutorials and demos. Yeah. So if you want to look at that, that's the one Trey gave us. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Trey, for that. So here are, in context and ideas, very few articles. The Alex Christie Pedagogy Toolkit for English is a few assignments that are in there. Really, in some cases, just kind of like stubs for assignments. Kind of places to get your brain kind of working in that direction. And some of these are older and dated. So if you try to click through some of Alex Christie's things there, some of them will be broken. Similarly, I don't know if we've linked anywhere to projects through the Voyant documentation, because they have a huge list of projects. The problem is many of them are older and broken links. So it could be a treasure hunt for you to navigate through there and see if any of them are still live. But yeah, so another option there. And then finally, this is just 4 data sets. The first 2, so the DH toy chest, that is a list of lists that Alan Liu and one of the UC schools, I don't know, Riverside, I'm going to say. I have no idea. It's not Riverside. One of the UC schools has curated a bunch of humanities data sets, largely textual data sets. Some are zip files, some are downloadable, some you can link to. This is where I got the inaugural addresses, the text files for the inaugural addresses. They're here. So that's a really rich resource that I go to in my own teaching often. Project Gutenberg we've talked about, and I won't spend much more time on that. And then OPen is Penn has they digitize lots of images and things like that. The thing that's interesting here is that they have XML formatted data about everything that they've digitized, and it's pretty easy to get through. It's very hierarchical, so it's as flat as possible, just meaning it's not super complicated to grab the files that you want to use, that sort of thing. So so that might be an option. And then finally, similarly, the Digital Public Library of America is largely like digitized objects, so there will probably be less text here, but again, they might have lots of metadata in there that you might be able to use for your projects. Again, the richest resources are going to be those two at the top, though, the toy chest and then Project Gutenberg. All right. So then, as we're going to break out again into groups to talk individually, and Kelly, I'll encourage you to jump in if I'm missing directives here. But let me see. Yeah, if I'm missing any directives here. But we broke out this morning to kind of look at the tool specifically, right? So what are some of the affordances of Voyant? What are some of the things that you can't do in Voyant? So we talked a little bit about that. What I think we can do best together this afternoon is think a little bit more broadly, kind of about those questions that Trey was asking. What are some of the assignments that we can build? What are some of the outcomes that we can expect from using Voyant? So I've put a few questions up here that we can all take into our groups. What kinds of projects are you thinking about? Do you have ideas for teaching with or researching with Voyant? Or are you teaching and researching with Voyant? And how's it going? Those kinds of things. What other kinds of computational text analysis interest you? So you can jump back a few slides when you're in your group and look at some of the examples that Kelly shared early in the presentation about what is the broad view of computational text analysis. Are there any next level kinds of questions that interest you, kinds of tools or processes or methods that interest you? Another interesting thing, how might we or how have we assessed Voyant projects in our teaching specifically here? I'm not going to assess anyone on their use of Voyant in their research. It's up to you. And then finally, what else do we need to know before jumping into next level computational text analysis? What are some other concepts, some other ideas that we might want to think through before we move into the next level sort of stuff? So these are all just to kind of like prime the I'm not going to say that prime the pump that I just did to kind of get us going thinking about these sorts of things.
Yeah, sorry. I was just in thinking of the amount of time that we have left. I don't see anywhere time to maybe look at how to export some of this stuff. Is it possible that we could devote a little bit of time at the end to see, like, once you've done these projects, how you can export them or use them outside of the browser?
I can show you that really quickly if you'd like, because I did need to cover that earlier and then we ran out of time. Jacob, that'll only take like 2 minutes.
Go for it. Yeah, for sure.
Can I still?
Yes.
Share screen. Okay. So this is kind of neat now that I'm in the room because I can actually see what I'm sharing. Okay, so let's hop in. Let's do Austin. And any of them, so you might recall how I showed you when you go over a particular skin area, it has this export URL, embeddable, da 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 da. So you can click on that little arrow thing. And last time I just quickly hit export and it opened it in a new tab. So you can do that. And what you can do is you can take this URL, right? So if I take this and I drop that, say, even into my chat for the, let's drop it in there just so you can see. Anyone in the chat could click on that and that would be the thing that they see.
Cool.
Right? So you can do it that way. That's one option. You can go back here. So I just closed out that other tab that opened. And you can also hit the button and you can choose some additional ways to export. So if you want to actually put it into another web page, you can do that as well. And you can choose this HTML snippet and that will work too. Your other option is you can export it as a PNG. That's an image file, right? I'm not sure how it's going to look. I just randomly picked 8. And I
Kelly,
don't
you
know
have
where,
a couple of questions behind you when you.
yeah, hold on just a second.
Yep.
So if that doesn't work, another way that a lot of folks do it and say it's easier is if you just open it in another tab and grab a screenshot.
Yeah.
If you just need a static image. You can, in addition, you can take the whole corpus link, the whole corpus URL at the top there and give that to someone. So if you're working on something with your class, you can grab that as well and share that. Questions? Or Trey probably has some more points. Go ahead.
Well, if you do the same thing on the blue banner at the top, you can get an embedded link for the entire page. Not, you can do it by individual skin, or you can capture this whole thing with all 5 skins.
And so the way that you would do that, you see that still has that little square with the arrow. You would just click that again. And you can grab the HTML snippet, or if you hit export, it will keep all of the skins that you currently have in their current settings, and you can copy that.
Is that something that you could then like keep the link and revisit your project where you left off?
Yes, right. And yeah, I've done that at least.
Good.
Today I did something else that didn't work though, so I like to double check. Go ahead, Trey.
And if you've created your own corpus, it will still work. So it's not just because it's the Austin or the Shakespeare that you can capture this. Basically, when you create this website, that URL is including your data.
Wow.
Cool.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So just to be clear, if I create my own corpus and then I click on I extract the URL and everything, and then I close the computer, I go to another computer and I put the URL, everything will be there. And
Yes.
I can keep interacting with those texts that now I don't have in my computer, right?
Yes.
All
If
right.
Cheryl clicks on that, it will open. My advice is if you're using the web interface, because there was no way we could go into this today, but you can create a local Voyant server on your own computer if you have something that's more private or something that's copywritten or something. But whatever you put in here, you can see in that URL that's what you're sharing. So you can send that to your students. My tip is that you should have some kind of a running document while you're working on these projects, maybe your list of stop words, because it'll save with that URL. But if you need to keep copying and pasting them into the visual tools, then you might want to just have that list somewhere. And then you should keep your URL probably on that like notes document as well.
That's great, thank you. But let's try to think together about, what if we can walk away today with, some ideas about working past some of the challenges that we might see. So, how do we assess these sorts of things? What are the next kinds of things that we need to learn about computational text analysis? Let's think together through some of those challenges so that when we all walk away here in about 25 minutes, we'll be ready to just, make some modules for our courses that have that are including Voyant in them. So why don't we just take like 10 minutes here. We'll come back together at 1:17 and share some of the conversation before we wrap up. Sound good? I know we talked about some stuff over here, but what came out of these conversations that folks would like to bring back to the group for the good of the order?
I thought it was really cool that we discovered you could export data as opposed to just visualizations from the different skins, some of the different skins.
Yeah, we talked a little bit about how data set acquisition can be a challenge. So Gregor is interested in using New York Times textual data and how challenging it can be to, or not in some cases, to kind of get that data that someone has, but they have it under they have it locked. locked away. So how much access do we have for those kinds of things? And we had all different use cases, none of which was actually pedagogical per se, which I found interesting because I thought that everyone just uses this in their teaching. What kinds of things are folks thinking about doing?
Cynthia, can I put you on the spot to share?
Sure. So I'm currently, my name's Cynthia Porter. I missed the introduction. So I'm in the modern languages department in the German section. And I'm currently teaching a course titled Women in German Media. And one of the examples that we're discussing right now is a rap duo called Sixten, and how in a recent study of over 30,000 German rap songs, this group was found as using the most violent and sexist language. And the surprise is that and violence against women in the language that they're using in their songs. And the surprise is that the group or the duo is comprised of 2 women. And there's therefore been controversy on how or what the group presents, right, to society. And so we talked about the lyrics in class, and I'm going to make a visualization of the lyrics to just provide a different point of access of this for the students to engage with, exactly looking at the terms, what's being repeated, what are the messages in one case study, or looking at one song that's being absorbed in society, and how that relates to conversations of what's being accomplished or not being accomplished by the group and what sort of content they're creating. So I was just thinking of using it as an additional point of access to something that I'm already discussing with the students, and just providing a different opportunity to present the work and seeing how it changes or adjusts the conversations we have in class.
Sorry, that's really cool. I was wrestling with the mute button like one does. Thank you so much. That's really, and it's a little akin to what Laura was talking about, how her kind of weighs into it. It brings the students in, it kind of lets them exercise muscles that they're sort of used to exercising, kind of close reading, those kinds of things, but just through a different lens, kind of using this tool. It's cool. Other ideas that folks are doing? What challenges do we see, or those sorts of things?
I think one of the challenges I see for this is dealing with projects that have enough text that you can actually get something that seems like to have a measurable significance. So some of the things people talk about, like oral histories, correspondence, and then entire corpora of an author's work, those are things, as opposed to if what you're dealing with is like less than 20 pages or something, it's going to be very hard to like get whole patterns out of that, unless it's very dense writing or something. But like I kind of made me interested in it opens up new opportunities though, because you can look at such large expanses of things. But choosing where to find them is the difficult thing. So. Like I wonder if we could say, apply something like this to all of the student evaluations that have been written at the college in the past 20 years. You know, and we could look at the COVID years, and you can see like the dips in sentiment and these kinds of things, but like, you know, or something like that.
I wonder if that data is available anywhere.
Created. I mean, it's available somewhere. It would just take some fishing.
Yeah, it's a lot of it's probably trapped in on Scantron sheets.
I bet it's digitized. It's just in some weird places, and I bet it's not deleted either. I bet that stuff still exists. Yeah. But like fishing that stuff out would be, yeah, that'd be a hassle.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, data acquisition, cleaning data, prepping data. Always a challenge.
I really like the idea of, so just tossing this around in my head, but one thing in teaching students how to be better communicators, right, and trying to teach them how to be better writers, I really tend to focus on getting them to establish a thesis with clear main points. And so having them feed their own writing into this to see if they think that the main point that they're making is X, but they only say X a couple of times in their writing, just really like sort of objectively drawing their attention to, and even with my own writing and thinking about that. Because one of the first things I did when we were playing around with everything was I just wanted to pull a file and convert it and uploaded it. And it happened to be one of my syllabi, a syllabus for one of my classes. And so looking at how many times I said certain words in my syllabus and wondering like, oh, am I not mentioning this enough or something like that? So
yeah, we thought about that earlier this morning, thinking about student writing. You know, the students probably come to rely on certain, so we all probably come to rely on certain constructions, right? So I, for example, say a lot, you know, or write, that is to say, right? So this would be a way of showing me that I use it entirely too much, putting that in front of me. But also, you know, a student, if we think about it from, you know, writing centers, a student could come in with their entire body of work from the semester, and even though their paper, the disciplines will be different for which they wrote their papers, their tics as writers will probably be consistent, you know, across the disciplines. So having students look at their writing this way might be one way of kind of abstracting out and sort of seeing tics and things like that. It's interesting. Thank you all for engaging with all of this so thoughtfully today. These are the folks that we want to thank for putting all this together, especially Kelly for doing so much of the lifting this morning and guiding us through Voyant specifically. And if you have questions, these are folks who you can contact to follow up. Again, you should have these slides available to you to go back and look us up and reach out to us if you want to. Thanks very much. I'll be reaching out. I'll send a follow-up email that will have a little survey instrument in it. It would help us out tremendously if you would. It's just, you know, 5 questions about what went well today, what else you'd like to know, you know, those kinds of things. So it'd do us a real service if you could take a few minutes for that. I'll say thank you all and ask if there are any final questions. What did I forget? Did I forget anything? Any local hosts? Any of that stuff? Cool. I see all my local hosts nodding their heads, so I'm grateful for that. All right. Thanks again, everyone. Have a great rest of your Saturday. Thanks for spending part of it with us.